And in 1995, I was in a psychiatric institution with major anxiety disorder, panic disorder, PTSD, and depression. So welcome to the conference. I'm so happy you're here.
And so I don't mean to be flip, I really don't, but it's my story and I'm not ashamed, I'm not embarrassed. It's why I'm here with you today.
I am Tammy West, and that is my story. Welcome to Consider Yourself Hugged, a place to find comfort and support as you navigate your mental and emotional well-being. So sit back and relax, unless you're driving, and get ready for this week's hug. Welcome, my fellow wonderful huggers. Welcome to week 5 of Mental Health Awareness Month. And if you watched last week, you may have heard me say that it was like the last week, but I didn't realize there were 5 weeks in May. Also, I am recording on Memorial Day, so I know you're watching post or listening post Memorial Day, but thank you if you had someone in your world who gave their lives for our country. We honor them today. So here we are. It has been kind of an emotional couple of days as we come into this final week of Mental Health Month. And I knew exactly what I wanted to talk about. And I think I titled it, I don't know, by the time I actually post it, I might change it, but From Chowchilla Kidnapping to Grayson Murray. And really what I mean by this is we have come so far. Have we come so far? Do we have a ways to go when it comes to mental health? And I think all of those things can be true at the same time. I have made a bunch of notes. And so my husband has been gone for a few days on a trip with his dad and his 2 aunts. And so I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do? And I can't remember how I found it, but I found this documentary. Oh, I know what it was. I'm sorry. I was listening to a podcast. I'll put a link. I love Crime Junkie. So when I'm driving and just need something to listen to, I listen to Crime Junkie. And so the episode was about the Chowchilla, California kidnapping in 1976. I don't know if you've heard of it. I'm going to pull up and just read a few things to you. It was just horrific. All of the kids were okay, by the way. So this was sometime in July 1976. 26 children and their bus driver vanished on the ride home from school in Chowchilla, a close-knit farming town of 5,000 nestled in the San Joaquin Valley, so like south of San Francisco. The police found the bus abandoned a few hours later, and what they found out happened. I'm going to stop reading now because I just want to just give you the rundown. And I'm going to put the links to the podcast, and there's a documentary that I watched on Netflix. There's a CNN article that I think they had a documentary that was really good. Okay, so this bus with the bus driver and 26 like elementary, middle school age kids was found. I mean, the bus was empty. And through a series of events, they discovered that three men with pantyhose over their heads. Now, just heads up, we're talking about trauma here is the reason that I wanted to start with this. Pantyhose over their heads, like sawed-off shotguns. They stopped the bus. They put half of the kids in one van, half of the kids in another van, and the vans were completely sealed up so the kids couldn't see outside. They drove them around for like 11 hours, but weirdly, they only wound up like an hour away from where they were taken. And I never really found out why that was, but so they drove around for 11 hours. They pulled the vans into like a tarp tent thing. They got them out one at a time, and there was a hole in the ground with a ladder. And one at a time, they made this driver and these children go down that ladder into what turned out to be like a 26-foot moving trailer that these 3 men had spent months burying in the ground near a rock quarry. And they made this hole, and they put the kids and the driver in there. They had a couple of mattresses, a little bit of food and water, and like 1 or 2 ventilation holes. They closed like a manhole cover and then completely filled it in with the rest of the dirt. And just even sharing that story, just, I mean, I listened to the podcast, I watched the documentary, I've been reading about it online quite a bit. Can you imagine like all of that being worst case scenario, right? Being ripped away from your home, gunmen with pantyhose over your head, and then basically being buried alive. And I think they were there for like 14, 10, 12, 14, it's a long time, hours. And eventually, and I hope you'll go and watch the story because I want to tell all of it to you, but it's really not the point of what we're going to talk about here. But eventually, with the bus driver and one of the students, they were able to push and move and break things, and they got out. And when they got out, they had no idea where they were. But someone who worked in the quarry saw this man with these kids, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I saw you on the news." Okay, so they get back to their town. They actually put the guys in prison, which, by the way, 2 got out in the early 2000s and 1 got out just a couple of years ago. Another long story, but they're all out. And so there they were, and this was in 1976. And I think the reason that this struck me so much is because in 1976, I was 12. And 12 was the height of, the things that happened with my parents. 12 was the height of bullying for me in my life. It's when my panic attacks were the worst. I was 12. And these kids were right around that age. So they go back to the town. The kids seem to be, when you look at the news articles and you look at some of the footage, and they're kind of laughing a little bit and everybody's rallying around them. They had a parade for them. They sent them to Disneyland. And this is the part where we are going to get in and talk about what it was like this is just a small subset of mental health in 1976. But and the article that I'm going to post from CNN, if you don't want to go and watch the whole documentary, I don't know about the CNN documentary, but I'm just on the article. So the Chowchilla Kidnapping was an international news sensation, with many headlines claiming that the children had bounced back, right? It's 1976. There's no such thing really as PTSD for children. I mean, maybe wartime things. There's not panic attacks, trauma, there's none of that. Few thought to look at what the kidnapping had done to the children's mental health. There was little consideration for how its effect might follow them into adulthood. After all, the field of child trauma psychiatry was still in its infancy. Most experts believe that kids were endlessly resilient. They just get over traumatic events. Diagnoses for PTSD, even for war veterans, didn't even exist yet. I didn't realize that in 1976. There was this wish that children would recover, forget about the event, and go on with their lives as though it never happened. And this was a medical person. In the aftermath of the Chowchilla kidnapping, an LA organization took the kids to Disneyland in an effort to help them recover. The local school offered little in the way of therapy or counseling. One mental health professional predicted, listen to this, one mental health professional predicted that only 1 out of the 26 would be emotionally affected by the kidnappings. But after Dr. Lenore Terror, she is a big part of this. She did a long study. After she arrived in Chowchilla in November, so July to November, she found that the prediction was dead wrong. Parents were terrified because 5 months after the incident, they could still hear their kids screaming in their sleep. No parent wanted to admit that his kid was the one in 26. And Dr. Tur said that. By the time I got out there, 100% were having problems. Dr. Tur was a child psychiatrist trained in San Francisco, and she was fascinated by this field of child trauma. And what she said was she wanted to know what happened to kids who were, quote, scared to death but hadn't died. And she realized that this was actually a natural case study where she could really look at childhood trauma. So she had all these kids who experienced the same thing. So they weren't physically harmed, but they were emotionally harmed. Now, today in 2024, I'm not exactly sure, or there were 4 or 5 in the documentary. And I know just from that and from research, there was 1 suicide. There were at least 1 in that group of 4 or 5 who had battled alcoholism and depression. One of the things that the doctor said that it wasn't in this article, I don't remember, I've looked at a lot of things, but she said, young children have this endless belief that they are going to be safe, that they are going to be taken care of, that the world is a good place. And when trauma like that happens, it's shattered. And so these kids were experiencing night terrors. They were experiencing thinking about their own deaths. So even though they were not physically harmed, they were psychologically harmed. And it's, again, being 12 in 1976. And I didn't go through anything like this, obviously, but it was like no one really believed that there was anything wrong with me. Every night I would have these panic attacks where I would hyperventilate and I couldn't breathe. And it happened like every night when the sun would go down. There was this belief that I was going to die and that something was wrong with me. And, we can psychoanalyze that to death, but there was trauma in my life. And the ACEs survey, I'll put a link to that as well. It's questions just to see it's the adverse, gosh, I can't remember what it stands for. Oh, the adverse childhood experiences. And so you can take that. And so there was some trauma, not like this, but there was some trauma. But there was no help. There was just no help to go through it. And I cannot imagine what these kids must have gone through. I hope that you'll take some time to read the article, watch it. The documentary that I watched is on HBO Max. If you don't have that, there's lots of places where you can go and learn some more. But thinking of that in 1976, now let's fast forward to just a couple of days ago here in 2024, when golfer, 2-time PGA winner Grayson Murray died by suicide. Now, that's one of the first times I've actually said that about a person since I've been teaching mental health first aid, which is going to be one of the things I'm going to encourage you to do before I jump off here today. But in mental health first aid, which is helping people to learn to recognize mental health challenges and then to be a bridge to people who have challenges, not to fix them, not to give them advice, but to be a bridge. Excuse me. And one of the things we talk about is language and the power of language. And you think about the family and friends who are left behind, and to use died by suicide is a way to help diminish their pain. And so instead of saying killed himself, I'm going to say died by suicide. So if you are one of those people who thinks that the world is too politically correct and why does everybody get offended? Listen, I get that there's some truth to that, but in this case, I think sometimes when we feel that way, like things are too politically correct or why does everybody get offended, it's because it's something we don't really understand. Now, I'm not encouraging you to be offended. That word can mean so many things, but I want to be there to try to help decrease people's pain. So I want to read a few things to you about Murray, and I'll put a link. The thing that makes this so different, so 1976, there's not a lot of help. We're not talking about mental health as much. PTSD was not a diagnosis. There's a huge stigma. I think we probably still use phrases like nervous breakdowns. It just was different. And now it's 2024, and we have this man who has so much success, and it looks, as you're reading, that he had so much love in his world, so much talent, and he took his life. And how does that happen? So I want to read just a little bit to you. So he battled alcoholism and depression. I read somewhere that he was diagnosed with social anxiety. That makes me think, now he's a golfer. He's in the public eye. Again, I'm not trying to say that I am living anything like those kids or anything like him. I'm not famous. I don't have millions of eyes on me, but people who are in the public eye at all, whether it's being a golfer or an athlete or a speaker or an actress or, a musician, you're in there, or anything that puts you in the public eye, and you're being judged. And so when I saw that he was diagnosed with social anxiety, that makes me think, I don't know, I read as much as I could, and I have a lot of his story here, but it was the same thing in every article. So I do not know the details, but it makes me think he may have battled with, what will people think of me? What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? What if I don't compare? I'm guessing part of that was there. And he withdrew. So I'm recording this on Monday. So he withdrew from the Charles Schwab Challenge. I don't know anything about golf, but on Friday they just said an illness. Now I'm just going to throw this out there, but he had always been open with his mental health and we'll read that in a minute. But if he had been having chest pains, he had a stomach virus or even a migraine or cracked his foot, then they would have said that. And so just an illness, I don't know. Why? Why did he not talk about it? I don't know. And so his parents revealed his cause of death in a statement yesterday, Sunday, and adding, it has been a nightmare for them to come to terms with his death. And they asked for privacy and asked for people to honor their son by, quote, being kind to one another. And they said, if that's a legacy he leaves, then that will be at least a wonderful thing. His coach talked about him having the heart of a lion. Love and kindness defined him, and he burned bright for 30 years. So how does this happen? I'm going to read you a little bit more. He's always been open about depression and anxiety and his bouts with alcohol. When he won a tour last year, he talked about his parents having, quote, been through hell and back, basically for the last 6 years for me fighting some mental stuff. And then he goes on to say, so I'm quoting, everyone has their battles. This is a year ago. Sometimes people are able to hide them and function, and sometimes you're not. And so I wonder, even though he's freely talking about it, I'm guessing he probably was hiding that a little bit last week. He says, I think our society now is getting better about accepting that it's okay to not be okay. I've embraced that mentality. I'm not ashamed that I go through depression and anxiety. It's interesting to me because I say that all the time too. My diagnosis in the mental hospital was depression, but that was not my demon. It was anxiety that I still battle now. And I always say I'm not ashamed of my mental health journey. If you're following me, currently I am on medication and weaning off. But when I say I'm not ashamed or I'm not embarrassed, but it took me during the pandemic 8 months, maybe longer, of suffering before I decided I needed to go back on medication. And I'm just telling you that I think part of it was, how could I have to go on medication when I speak about this and I've come so far? And so I know we've embraced that it's okay to not be okay, but there's still that little part where we hide a little bit about it. The article goes on to talk about he used social media to reach out to other people dealing with similar issues. And then he says, it says, to reach out to others dealing with similar issues in a sport where, listen to this, losing takes place far more than winning. Oh my gosh. Like if I were out there speaking and I didn't do well more than I did do well, oh my gosh. When you think about any sports where many sports losing takes place more often than winning. And he said after he won the Sony Open, or after he won that, he said that he often felt like a failure. He had gone 6 years from winning on the PGA Tour as a rookie to winning on some other tour as he worked his way back up. He says, I just thought I was a failure. I always looked at myself as a failure. I thought I had a lot of talent that was just a waste of talent. It was a bad place. But like I said, you have to have courage. You have to have the willingness to keep going. Lo and behold, that's what I did. And I'm here and I'm so blessed and I'm thankful. So he was at a good place. You know, I remember talking in my first book about like these blinds. Like my life with mental illness was when it was the worst. It was like I was living in this room with room darkening blinds. And it was just dark, 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 dark. And every once in a while the blind would lift and I'd be in a good place. And I'd be like, oh, I'm not a failure. Everything's okay. Because my failure was getting bad feedback when I was student teaching. That was my big failure. But all of our brains are wired so different, and we have such different life experiences that what's trauma to one person seems silly or may not be to another person. But I would be in these dark blinds, and sometimes they would pull up, and I would be like, everything's okay, and then wham, they would come right back down. And so I see him here, like with the blinds were open, and he's like, it's okay, I'm blessed and I'm thankful. And he said he became a Christian and he got engaged and he was planning this wedding. And then he says, my story is not finished. I think it's just beginning. I hope I can inspire a lot of people going forward that have their own issues. It just really did get me choked up because I can imagine him feeling that way, you know, the up and down with the positive and the negative, and just living in that place where you know it's okay to not be okay. But then the deep, dark times, listen, I've said this so many times before, but there is no physical pain that is as bad as the mental and emotional pain of going through deep, dark mental illness. And so I was thinking, as we kind of wrap this up, like I said, I was the age of those kids during Chowchilla, the age when panic attacks weren't a thing, the time period where I wasn't understood. And I thought, why didn't I go down that really deep, dark path? Like we're looking at Grayson. Grayson's 30, you know, and he grew up in a time more so when mental health issues, well, it was okay to talk about it. And then I also think with Grayson, he was a Christian, and so am I. And so even though I haven't gone down that dark path, why do I still battle anxiety? Why does it still rear its ugly head? And then I thought, well, the bottom line when it comes to him taking his life, dying by suicide, is this. We have a lot of treatments for mental health challenges now, you know, medication and all kinds of different therapy. And especially since COVID, we even have apps where you don't even have to go visit. If you can't, you can talk to someone virtually. We have all that. We also have treatments for heart disease, really great treatments, but people still have heart attacks and die. We have amazing treatments for some cancers are completely curable, but even with those completely curable cancers, sometimes people die. And I think the bottom line is if we talk about mental health the way we talk about physical health, and we say that it's real, and it is, and we try to treat it, then we have to know that probably forever, no matter how hard we try, there are some people who won't be able to pull themselves up. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean questioning that. I don't want people to relate that to, oh, we haven't come very far, because we have. I know we have a ways to go, but we have come far. And so I was thinking about that question, why didn't I go down that path? And for me, it was so many things, so many things. My relationship with Jesus is first and foremost. That got me through a lot of times. My family and friends. I even have this little mug that says fabulous. Come back. So if you're watching, it says fabulous friends. Whoops. And now I'm spilling coffee everywhere. It's actually coffee/hot chocolate. Family and friends, my husband, my children, there's so much support in there. This next one, I really have been thinking about this. Like, why am I weaning off medicine now? Why am I at a really good place right now? Because with medication, I want you to know, it wasn't that I said, oh, I'm better now, I can stop. I'm very sensitive to lots of different medications. And so I was, even on a low dose, feeling very tired. And I also know that some people need to be on medication for a lifetime, and some people it's for a season. And for me, it's a season. So it's not because, oh, I'm anti-medication or I'm embarrassed. It's because I don't like the side effects. And I have worked so hard over the past year to climb my way back out after the pandemic that it's time. And so that's what I'm doing with my doctor right now. But this one, okay, I was like, what have I done? This is huge. Allowing myself to fail and even to talk about it. When we think about Grayson, and when we think about not necessarily with the Chowchilla kids growing up with, I don't know what all their issues are. I looked for current time and I couldn't really find much, but I'm assuming that there was a lot of anxiety. I don't know about perfectionism, but back to Grayson and to me and people like me, just wanting to be perfect. And it didn't matter what that, like I taught a mental health first aid class last week, and someone wrote on the evaluation, they wish they'd had more time to work in groups. And I was like, wow, I screwed up. Okay, nope, I should have done that. And then I stopped and said, wait, first of all, it's not my schedule. It's the schedule that goes along because it's a very structured class. But second of all, yeah, I probably talked too much in segment 3, and I need to remember that so that I can give them 1 or 2 extra minutes. And I said it out loud. Gosh, maybe I messed that part up. I'm not perfect. And speaking that to people has been huge for me. My default, if I've messed up, is to immediately think why I didn't do it. But I'm getting better and better. And when I say it out loud, it takes my brain to a different place. So whatever it is that you struggle with, really focusing on that and working through it. What else did I put? Continuing to learn and grow. And that has to do, doing this podcast helps me to learn and grow. Just reading and listening to podcasts, helping me to learn and grow. Counseling and medication. Those are the reasons, and I'm still doing it. And my first panic attack was when I was 9 years old, which means it's been 50 years. And I hope you're not thinking, especially if you're young, oh my gosh, am I going to have to battle my whole life? It's not really a battle. It's just, we all have things that we struggle with. Anxiety is the thing that I struggle with. And so it's just a life process. And I think I'm saying it loud right now. I think I've come to terms with this. This is my thing. And I'm just going to keep trying to live a better life. So I'm going to leave you with 2 things. The first one is, and I have this in all caps, and I'll put it in the show notes this way: never let anyone shame you into not caring for your mental health in the way that you need. Whether it's counseling, whether it's medication, whether it's self-help, whether it's whatever it is, never let someone shame you when you are struggling. And number 2, get trained in mental health first aid. Their goal, I went to the summit in April, and it says Be the 1 in 15. I'll post information in the show notes, which I've done before. I don't have a class scheduled, but if I get enough interest, because you can do it virtually, then I would love to do that with you. But Mental Health First Aid is sponsored by the National Council for Mental Wellbeing, and their goal in the United States is to have 1 in 15 people trained. Now, it's in like 25 countries, so I'm just talking about the US. And what that means is when we think about Grayson, people knew that he was struggling, but sometimes when it comes to whether it's suicide or anything else, people will say, well, I didn't know, I'm shocked. But first of all, typically there are signs that the person showed to someone, maybe not you, but to someone. And it sounds like people were really trying to help him. But secondly, if 1 in 15 people are trained to notice and to help and to connect and to bridge them into the help that they need, wow, that's huge. And that can change the world. That can even help more removing the stigma. And that can help all of us to be healthier mentally, and physically too. I'm so glad you chose to join today. I always feel like I'm all over the place, but I try. I hope you can hear my heart. Even when I have a strict outline, it still goes all over the place. But thank you for joining. Thank you for wanting your emotional and mental health to grow. Thank you for being part of my community. Please follow me on social media. I have the links in the show notes. A Place for Women is also a private group you can join. Please continue to share and download and rate. Send notes on the show notes and on the Facebook page. Email me, text me. Share your story. And until we're together next time, consider yourself hugged.